You may have heard people say that the music that people are making now is like way worse or something than the music that people used to make. I mean, this is probably just toxic nostalgia or something. Can't be based in any real facts, right? The way we make music now has to produce the same results as the way we made music before, right? I mean, I don't think that has to be true. We make music in such different ways now. We have all these DAWs, VSTs, and whatever. And back in the old days, they had what? Tape? Right, Miso? So what if the old ways of making music produce different results than the new ways? I would like to submit to you that the most important difference between modern music and old music is that old music has mistakes, new music often doesn't. And this is a bad thing. Now stay with me. We need to go for a walk to talk about this. So I've been thinking about two songs that I like. Styles is Music for a Sushi Restaurant and Stevie Wonder's Superstition. I think that these two songs are actually a fair comparison, despite the fact that they are far apart in years, because Music for a Sushi Restaurant, in my opinion, is going for like 70s pop funk in like groove and vibe. And then of course Superstition is 70s funk. So I think it is a fair comparison, and I just want to get out ahead of this. I do like both songs. I'm not, I like them. I listen to both of them. So this is not like a which is better comparison. This is like a which process yields the result that you like comparison. Anyway, as far as Superstition goes, you might be surprised to learn, like I was, that Stevie actually played drums and Moog bass and clavichord, and he sang on it. And Jeff Beck played guitar. And the story goes that Stevie and Jeff were jamming in the studio, and Jeff was playing drums and came up with a thing, and Stevie came up with a thing, and it just sort of grew organically out of that. But because Stevie was recording to tape, you just can't make things perfect. And it turns out I didn't even really notice these small mistakes until I was like hyper fixating looking for them as I was thinking about this video. My whole life listening to that song, I just never really even noticed that the drums are a little bit off. Well, the drums are a little bit non-metronomic. The vocals, of course, are slightly out of tune. Wow, this is pretty big. It's pretty, though. I don't think I can get across that. I would have to jump. I'm not jumping. Anyway, I just never noticed until I, got it in the DAW and started to try to put a metronome to it, basically. Now, thinking about Music for a Sushi Restaurant, it's basically perfect the whole way, and I never really needed a DAW to be able to tell that. All the drums are perfectly metronomic. The vocals are perfectly tuned. Oops, I walked out of frame. Like, the vocal has that thing where it'll just hold an exact hertz and not move at all, which just humans just can't do that unless they're autotune. And this is not anti-autotune. I hope everyone knows that. I think it's a great enabling power. But what I am saying is that it might be robbing us of a little bit of relatability. Anyway, so the drums are metronomic. And I'm just wondering if the groove being exactly perfect is actually a detriment, or if it really does enhance a listener's experience. Because my experience of it is that it's a little bit less interesting to listen to. And so maybe we should do an experiment later where I myself, Lucas Deal, will play the groove on finger drums and bass as best as I can as a non-bassist, non-drummer. And I'll just do my very best and see how well I can get it. And then we'll see how that sounds. And then I'll quantize all of that perfectly, and we'll see how that sounds. And we'll see what the effect of perfection versus like pretty darn good imperfection is. And you tell me. So let's talk about something called just noticeable difference, which is the amount that two stimuli have to be different before you can notice a difference between them. For example, if you take two fingers and touch them to your arm, how far apart do the fingers have to be before you can tell that you're being touched by two fingers instead of one finger? For example, do these two tones sound different? What about these two tones? The difference between the first two was 1 hertz, and the difference between the second two was 3 hertz. And research shows that you should only be able to tell the difference between the second two where there's 3 hertz of difference. For our purposes, we care about the just noticeable difference between two audio events, like how far apart do 2 snaps have to be before they sound like 2 different snaps instead of one bigger snap? That's the question. And this pertains to whether or not mistakes matter at all. Like if you make a mistake and it's only, I don't know, 1 millisecond, can anybody even tell? So let's do some investigating here. I'm gonna play you 2 clicks, and the question is, how many milliseconds of delay does it take for you to notice that it's 2 clicks instead of 1? Here you go. For me, I hear the 2 clicks as distinct, completely separate sounds at around 10 milliseconds, maybe 8. Below that, it kind of sounds like the transient is lengthening and there's some phasing and stuff, but it doesn't sound like completely separate clicks. But what if the 2 audio events are like 2 different instruments, like drums and bass? I've made a bass and drum groove, and first I'm gonna delay the bass, and then I'm gonna delay the drums, and we'll see which one is worse. Here's the bass delay. And here's the drum delay. How did those grooves feel? Was there an amount of delay that actually felt good or bad? I was surprised by how flexible delaying the drums was compared to delaying the bass. I felt like you could delay the drums a lot more before it became really bad versus delaying the bass, which I feel like you could notice like it was a mistake at about 10 milliseconds, which we might unscientifically define as our just noticeable difference for audio events. What this tells us is that if you make a mistake within 10 milliseconds, nobody can tell. On some instruments and in some circumstances, you could make mistakes that are even greater than 10 milliseconds. I feel like this confirms what bassists have known this whole time, which is that they're literally the most important person of any band. This also kind of confirms what drummers know too, that you can place a snare hit, for example, earlier or later in the groove and have it mostly affect the vibe or the feel of the groove rather than actually sounding like a mistake. So here's a drum and bass groove, which I played fully myself on bass and finger drums and lightly edited because I don't actually play those instruments. And then I'm going to play you that same groove which I have now completely quantized. And you tell me which is better, which is more interesting, which do you like? This is, of course, subjective. My opinion is that the unquantized groove is just more interesting to listen to. It's like the quantized one, I know exactly what's going to happen, and so I don't have to listen to it. But in the unquantized one, there's slight variances that make it interesting to continue to listen rather than completely check out. To me, this is an interesting result. I think that different processes are just always going to produce different results. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that we can make music in like a vastly different way than the people made it in the 70s and still have the same result, the same quality. And there are a couple things about the old way that might increase the quality as well. The old way to make music, not only did you have to preserve mistakes on tape because you couldn't edit them, the only way to record music, because there was no home recording, was for a studio to think that you were good and give you a deal, which meant that bands had to spend a lot of time in front of audiences testing things, finding what works, testing out their musicianship, troubleshooting songs, scrapping things, writing new things. And so that editing process all happened before the recording. And so the songs that they took to the studios, in my opinion, might have been better quality songwriting than what could happen if you just sat in front of a DAW and wrote a song right in the DAW. The bad thing about that process was that, of course, that was a huge barrier to so many people that just precluded so many people from actually making music. And I don't think that was great, actually. I would rather have a bunch of mediocre songs that people get to make than have like a few golden songs. I think it's important for people to make music, even if it is not that good. So I don't want anybody to think that I don't think you should make music. I don't want anybody to think that if your song isn't perfect, you shouldn't record it. I think you should do that. But I do think that if you're a music maker, you maybe should think about spending longer songwriting, spending longer arranging. If you want a modern day comparison between like the old way of recording versus the new way, I actually have 2 albums out that are recorded both ways. I have an album called You May Feel, which I wrote the songs. We played together as a band for like a year and we just did them. And I have an EP that's just like from this chair. Like I just made it in the chair by myself. I definitely spent less time songwriting on that album. That second one is Altline. It's an EP. So listen to those 2 if you want to and tell me which one's better. Or don't. Feel free to subscribe if you have enjoyed talking about music with me today. I've been hopping on Threads a lot. I'm enjoying it, so you can follow me there if you happen to want to do that. Go make music.